because again, to get a group like this together in a room is, I don't know whether it's ever going to be done again, at least for a year. So let's go forward. Now, our next, to me, an expert, and we did a videotape. You know, you have to go to John Bain's office. It's in Seguin. It should be a museum to the Vietnam War, and it should be part of a movie to play tribute to veterans. But the man you're about to hear from, and I kept my notes, and someone, I need all of the right there on the, I have the notes. John went and served our country in Vietnam, and is a self-made millionaire, no, the notebook, is a self-made millionaire many times over. Now let me give you the exact dates of the man you're about to hear from. Yeah, self-made millionaire. Now, nothing was given to him by the deals. Let me explain who this man is, because he won't do it. He won't explain to you. $50 million deals. He gave away a Rolls Royce. He gave away the Rolls Royce in 1985. No, 1984. He was saved from alcoholism. Let me tell you about that. Went to his knees and passed out. And then when he came to, he just asked God, and I'm going to let him tell you more about that. Never went to Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, just did that. And then he decided, after all the success that he had, that he was going to build the Vietnam Veterans Memorial that is here in San Antonio at the Tobin Center, front of the Tobin Center. Let me explain this, though. Now, self-made millionaire many times over, right? And Vietnam, to me, a hero. Went to the business community and said, I've got this idea. We need to honor the veterans. Let me put it this way, what happened. He didn't kiss the ring. The business community said, you didn't ask our permission. And if you pick up his book, you'll read more about the story. This man has had dinner with presidents. He has served with Ronald Reagan, right? Just amazing, but decided to build this memorial. Let me tell you what happened. There was, how many fundraisers, John, were they? 90 fundraisers over 3 years? 3-year period, there was 90 fundraisers. Now, doing the math on that, that's 30 a year. The average contribution was $5. And they raised over $1 million to build this memorial. And what happened was, John, in his desire to get this done, when everybody else said, nah, when the people that could write the check wouldn't, he went to the people on the street. And I'm going to ask John some questions, where he got that idea, how he did it. The memorial is built. Guys, I want you to meet Mr. John Dullivan Baines. Come on up, John.
Thank you.
Get to sit in the director's chair.
Okay. Hear me all right?
Yes. Now, John, I'll start with some questions for you. Or would you like to start saying anything else first before I get you questions?
No, that's quite all right. I'm sure we'll get to just about everything before we're finished here.
John, when your friends that you thought, the business community, the bankers, the lawyers, and all the aristocracy of San Antonio refused to support you, how did you decide to continue forward, and how did you get that advice? How did you do that?
Well, when we embarked on the project to create a Vietnam Veterans Memorial to honor our veterans, and especially those who perished in the line of duty, my board of directors and I just assumed in Military City, USA, that we'd be swimming in money because it was to be paid for through private contributions. It was not paid for by the city or the county. It was paid for by private contributions. And we just assumed that the major corporations and the wealthy families who've made their fortunes off the military would contribute to honoring the very people who were responsible for their fortunes. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. And I met with a very prominent banker one day because I was totally mystified by why the business establishment was not supporting the troops. And I asked him, I said, is there anything that you have observed that I haven't done that I need to do, or is there something that I've done that I shouldn't have done? He said, I can tell you exactly what it was. He said, you didn't ask permission. And that's exactly what he said. I said, well, I'm not sure. And in my naivety, I said, well, I've gotten permission from the Fine Arts Commission and the Historic Design Review Board with the City of San Antonio and the City Council. I said, they've approved it. He said, oh, no, that's not what I mean. He said, when you do something in San Antonio that's as high profile as what you're doing, there are a certain group of business leaders who you need to get permission from. Well, I became incensed with that thought process because that's just not in me. I was brought up as a bare knuckles brawler by a father who was the same way and a grandfather who was the same way. And we've never groveled for anybody. Never, ever. No matter what the cost. So I said, well, if that's what we're dealing with, then we'll just go over you, around you, or under you. We'll get it done. He said, well, if you take that attitude, you'll never get the money. I said, with all due respect, watch. Because what we had been doing is we had been going to the major corporations just thinking that they would write big checks. And they turned their back on the veterans. Well, that very evening I was having dinner with my parents at their home, and I was kind of singing the blues to my mom and dad about what I had encountered earlier that day. And my father said, you know, you're concentrating on the wrong thing. And I have to tell you, this is some of the best advice I've ever gotten in my life. He said, you're concentrating on the wrong thing. And I said, I'm not sure I understand. He said, you're concentrating on those that won't. You need to concentrate on those that will. And I said, would you like to explain that to me? He said, stop and think about this. He said, the sons and daughters of the chairman of the board of the major corporation or the sons and daughters of the president of the bank are typically not the people who fight our wars. He said, the people that fight our wars are the sons and daughters of the working man. He said, you need to rethink your fundraising approach to things and go to the man on the street. He said, you're not going to get big chunks of money. He said, but I promise you they will pay for it. Well, I had a meeting with my board of directors the next day and told them we were going to completely retool our fundraising approach. And we were going to reach out and invite the people who are never invited to the party. The people who are always on the outside looking in. The man on the street. In a period of 3 years, we had 90 fundraisers, which is almost 3 a month. Everything from a Bob Hope USO show at what used to be the Municipal Auditorium, it's now the Tobin for the Center for the Performing Arts, all the way to neighborhood bake sales. And we had every kind of fundraiser you can possibly imagine. We even had a football game between the San Antonio Police Department and the Bexar County Sheriff's Department, appropriately named the Pork Bowl. And the money came in dribbles. It was paid for by the fireman, the policeman, the postman, the clerk at the convenience store, the ladies at the dry cleaners. There was a lady that used to be a waitress at the Jim's coffee shop I used to frequent. She even passed the hat one morning at breakfast. He was paid for with nickels and dimes and dollar bills, which I always felt was more appropriate because just that many more people feel like they own a piece of the rock down there. They helped make that happen, as opposed to the people who you always see their picture in the society magazines or in the society section of the newspaper. The philanthropists didn't step up. The people that count stepped up. And yes, it was hard. And through that process of taking on the establishment, because I took them on and I exposed them for who they were to the community, I was not going to let them get away with that. And it cost me dearly. They ruined me financially. But in retrospect, the way I look at that, the only way they felt like they could get to me was by stripping me of my wealth. Because that's what's important to them, is their wealth. But in actuality, yes, money's important to all of us. We have to pay our bills. But what was more important to me was fulfilling an obligation I made to the veterans and to the families of those who perished. I made a commitment to those people, and I was going to follow through with it at any cost. I went from multimillionaire to dead broke, but it was worth it to me. When I called out the San Antonio business community publicly, a friend of mine said, "You know, you just committed professional suicide." And I said, "I'm not sure I understand what you mean." He said, "You'll never do a deal with those people again as long as you live." I said, "Well, you know what?" I said, "Stop and think about this for a minute." I said, "Losing money pales by comparison to the sacrifices some of our veterans have made. And more especially, the families of those whose loved ones did not return." I said, "Shit, man, you can always make money." I said, "I can always rebuild my career." I said, "But not following through with a commitment as important as this, that's not even an option." That was a long version of an answer to your question.
It's okay. That's okay. John, and you had to declare bankruptcy. And it was all during that putting together the memorial.
No, I filed for bankruptcy, but I told my attorneys, my CPA, I refuse to taint the memorial with my personal problems until that memorial is paid for. I said, once that memorial is paid for, then I'll take care of my personal business. So I filed for bankruptcy 30 days after the memorial was completely paid for. I wanted the memorial and what it represented to remain pure and not be tainted by my problems.
That's spectacular. Thank you. So I want to give the panelists a chance. I've got more questions if the panelists don't have any comments. So what makes somebody persistent? I mean, like he decided he was going to do something, and then he just had to. Yes, John.
May I interject something before you
Sure you can.
get their feedback?
Yes.
Something that Anita touched on earlier, which I think is an integral part of why I was so driven to do what I did, not just because it was the right thing to do, and you make a commitment, you follow through at any cost, as far as I'm concerned, is I'm a recovering alcoholic. And I've been sober for almost 34 years. And I can remember the date of May the 18th, 1985. In the wee hours of the morning, I was on the backside of a 3-day drunken binge. And I was going to die that night. There's no question in my mind. I was going to die that night. I was dying. I was going to, I was. And I reached out to God because it was so totally out of control. And I was a terrible alcoholic, I have to be honest with you about that. And I reached out to God and I pled. I prayed out loud. I was not married at the time, I was single, and I was on the floor of my bedroom in my underwear praying out loud. Please make this stop. Dear God, please make this stop. And he told me, fear not, my child. You're safe in my arms. and I have created you to champion the common man. Next morning I woke up, and it was over. I've never been to AA, never been to counseling, never been to the whiskey farm. I woke up and it was over. And almost 34 years later, to this very day, I have never had the slightest inclination to have a drink. But I think that what happened to me, and I'll be interested in hearing what the experts have to say, because let me digress a minute. I have to interject this. I have never done anything in moderation. Anything. I don't care if it's athletics or the military or drinking or business. I mean, it's always pedal to the metal. That's just kind of who I am. And I did that with my drinking. And I think that because within less than a year, 6 months actually, from the time I had my last drink, I made the commitment to the veterans that we were going to build that memorial. 6 months, and I have to promise you, I could have never, ever done that if I'd been drinking. But from a pure layperson's point of view, I'm certainly not as educated as these experts here today, but I've got a lot of street smarts when it comes to drinking.
John, you're the expert today.
I'm the expert on that.
You're the expert today.
And I think I may have channeled all of that almost obsessive-compulsive disorder to building that memorial at any cost, even if it cost me everything that I had. Which in the rearview mirror, it was well worth it. Because you can never take that memorial away from our veterans. Never, ever. Sure. But you can always rebuild a career. Right?
So panelists, was it obsessive-compulsive behavior? You have something? Yes, please.
That came into my mind, and you self-diagnosed yourself. I was thinking, I wonder if his brain has a tendency for OCD, and then perhaps, yes, you going about it with fire and vigor, your brain made a positive choice to replace alcoholism with something that took an equal amount of glucose in your brain and also an equal amount of desire. You replaced it with something positive and beautiful. Your brain made an excellent choice. I think also you were touched by a miracle. Things that science cannot yet explain, or maybe science is not submitted to yet, but research is leading us that way, right? I would love to hear from the doctors if there is any interface here with mirror neurons, and I would love to hear if there's any interface with the social consciousness. As he said, the common man is the one that paid for this all without agreeing. They didn't go to a board meeting or a wine tasting and say, let's all do this and we'll look so great. The common man, $5, a nickel at a time. Was there a social consciousness underneath? And also, are mirror neurons related to what John was able to do in any way? Those are the questions I have. The comment I have is that in the theory of traumatology, which anyone that goes to war, we can kind of assume that you have been exposed to trauma, right? Your own or someone else's. The theory of traumatology says to find meaning from trauma, the higher your creativity, the higher your resiliency. Resiliency being a mind-body term that we talked about today. Resiliency in your brain took things that were stuck in the back, what you experienced in war, perhaps, and pulled it to the frontal lobes somehow through creativity. And in the frontal lobes, you are able to step outside of your own body and think about your thinking. And I think that was a strength for you, whether you knew it or not. Your frontal lobes were engaging in thinking about your thinking. When your father said to you, you have your eye on the wrong ball, it was like a wake-up for you in your frontal lobes. And I think they became very active and started to think creatively, becoming like water, as you said, going around or through you. If you block us, we'll go around or through you. Yeah.
Well, Sunita asked me one time, was there a time or times when you wanted to quit? And you know, that thought never crossed my mind. It was almost as if every time an obstacle was thrown in front of me, it made me just that much more determined. I mean, it was almost like it was fueling the fire, as opposed to setting me back or discouraging me. Yes, there were huge disappointments, primarily with people. Not the man on the street, but the business community, people that said they would do certain things that didn't follow through and really kind of left us in a lurch. Yes, there were just huge disappointments, absolutely. But as far as wanting to quit, that was not an option. I mean, it never crossed my mind.
Okay, so I just had some thoughts from Viktor Frankl's work. I think in our society, we are lucky in that we're relatively affluent, right? We can mostly cover our basics, food, shelter, clothing. We can pursue education and start to achieve higher social achievements like school and pursue family. And when we get to the point where we have experienced success, like John has experienced, many of us fall into the trapping and think that that is the road to happiness, right? And there's a lot of talk about that not filling the cup, that can sometimes lead to existential crisis, sort of a missing of purpose in life. Now, John didn't go that way. What he actually experienced was finding what Viktor Frankl referred to as one of the reasons why we are here on earth is to seek our meaning in life. That human beings are basically meaning-seeking beings. So we're not human beings, we're meaning beings. And we can do it one of three ways, and John kind of tapped into all three of them through our attitude. So the defiance of his spirit, did you see that in him? You're not going to tell me what to do. I see what I have to do. Through the creativity, the way he chose to combine his power, his money, his resources, his connections, his wisdom he gained from others, he tapped into that power of creativity, and also his experiences that propelled him to make that commitment. So in his way of using those three tools of logotherapy, he used the creativity and the experiences and the attitudinal change to lock in to what life was asking of him. So he was no longer reacting or being put in a victim state. And so with that as your background, as your foundation, you launched into your purpose.
So what Maggie's saying, the science behind what Maggie's saying, the research is showing us that happiness is not in your brain, it is not pursued, it is actually ensued. And the studies are showing this, along with the correlational studies about how you actually grow younger. What Maggie was talking about, and even Jana, your brain is a meaning-making machine. So John took what devastated him, the suffering he saw with veterans, and he created a purpose for his brain. Because the brain, all of your brains, it's not just John, by the way. What you're going to hear today is applicable to all of you. All of you have this. The truth is, you want to know the big secret of today? All of you are the experts. These people just bumped into it. All of you have it, and your brain is looking for meaning and purpose. What we're finding is, and I have all the research, I can read it to you, but what the brain does is it takes the trauma and it forms resilience, and your trauma is probably an access to creating meaning in your life. Now, it could have been the grace of God that allowed John to do that, but that's what these ladies are talking about. I'd love to hear anything from the medical side too. What do you know? And I know I'm a geek about this. I'm actually doing a correlational study on purpose and engagement with the University of Chicago. But what is said in the medical field about the brain when it's got this goal it's going for? What do we know about that?
In fact, I have a question. When you wake up or you were waking up every day in the morning and you were doing this fundraising, what was the pleasure, source of joy? Was it the act that you're following through on your conviction? Or was it the response that you were getting from the public? Or was it the very fact that the goal itself was inspiring, so you didn't need any feedback? So what was it that was driving you? What was your source of joy during this whole process?
I think it was the level of acknowledgement and appreciation on the part of the veterans and the families of those who had lost a loved one. I think knowing I was doing the right thing fueled me. There was nothing in it for me. I mean, as a matter of fact, I could see my business under assault.
Yes.
So I mean, I was fighting this on two different fronts, and the analogy I've always used over the years is that, you know, I had a thriving business and I was building the memorial, and I was seeing my business under assault, and I was having a hard time raising the money with the memorial. But the analogy I use is I've got two small children, which coincidentally at the time I had young daughters. I thought, we're walking down a path together, and we get to a fork in this path. And one of these children you're going to have to send on their way alone, who you may or may never see again. And you take the other path with the other child, hoping someday you'll see the one you sent off alone again. Well, I think you know which is which. The child I sent off on their own was my business. And the child I stayed with were the veterans and the families. So the joy that I got every day, not every day, because I tell you what, there were some very, very rough days, believe me, was knowing I was doing the right thing because of the feedback I would get from the veterans. And I can tell you a short story, starting with the day, 2 days after the dedication of the memorial. I decided I need to get out of town. I'm going to go on about a week's vacation. I got on an airplane, and I was sitting in coach because I couldn't afford first class anymore. And I was sitting there, and a fellow walked up to me and put his hand on my shoulder, and I looked up at him. I didn't know who this man was, never laid eyes on him. He said, I just want to thank you for yesterday. He said, I was in the Marine Corps in Vietnam, and I came down from Dallas for the dedication. By the way, we had over 10,000 people show up for the dedication. And every single day for years after that, someone would say something to me on the street, in a restaurant, convenience store, or I'd get a formal letter from someone or a handwritten note thanking me. Now, man, you can't buy that stuff. I mean, you know, you can always rebuild a business. You can always make money. And, you know, looking back, probably the most unhappy time in my life was when I was drinking. With all that money, I was extremely unhappy. And I've shared that lesson with my daughters. I said, you know, there's more to life than money. So, did I answer your question?
No, you did, and in fact, that is what I wanted to highlight more than anything else, because number one is the overwhelming emotion that I experience when I listen to you is one of strength, and
Excuse me?
strength, really, you know, strength with you know, which does not get faced by any obstacle that comes. But having said that, as simple human beings, and you know, when we translate everything into physiological principles, we all work at the level of reward circuits. And therefore, everything we do to some extent, or to a large extent, is mediated by what rewards we get. And though when I say rewards, it kind of sounds rather cheap, but it's not meant to be cheap. A reward can certainly be a sense of fulfillment, a sense of doing the right thing, a sense of feeling that I have a purpose. So what was happening was the reward circuit initially was wrongly tied to alcohol, and it was not giving the benefit that it was really doing. And one day, by a process which medicine, as somebody said, we've not yet understood, a great transformation happened. You realize, okay, this is not what is really giving me my reward. So the frontal cortex said, you know what, this doesn't work, just stop. And repurposed, and the reward circuit just became internal fulfillment of progressing towards a goal. Now, we all have that ability. Having said that, we want 10,024 things at any given time. I want to be this, but I also want to be that. I want to get this, but I also want to be that. So we become unsuccessful in everything. But what we had was, I want this and this alone, come what may. And that became that immense source of strength, which no obstacle in the town or anywhere else could stop you. And that is what I'm learning from you. As today, it's our opportunity to learn from you. And what I'm learning is the amount of the courage that comes naturally because of the dedication to one single purpose, completely convinced in your heart that that alone is right. And that is what I gather from you. Thank you, sir.
Now, Dr. Venkat, there is, I know you're familiar with the research out of Berkeley that shows us human beings actually have a DNA propensity for altruism. There's a disposition. You, in your DNA, were wired to make a difference. Now, was it nature versus nurture? Was it the thank you that was coming at him, or that natural inclination? I think it was a combination of the two, but we are wired, and there's a book, Born to be Good, if you're interested in that, but I think it was a play of those two elements of the DNA disposition to want to, and I think it's not just that we're meaning-making machines, but we want to know, we're wired to know that our life had some contribution. We want to make sure it wasn't just a time. It just wasn't wasted. It wasn't transient, as Dr. Viktor Frankl would say. The people that survived the Holocaust found suffering, found that their suffering made some sense if they found some meaning in it. And that's what made them resilient. And I think that's what you're talking about too, is that he was pulled. Is that what you're saying, that he was pulled to do it?
No, I wanted to approach this actually from a very simple elemental level, at a simple physiological level. Because, when we see a great person, what happens is, yeah, meeting Mr. Baines is so great, but let me carry on with my life because, I'm a normal person.
Right.
But the goal is for each one of us to try to reach that level.
Right.
Because you are a model and an inspiration to all of us. So what I'm trying to do here is see the bridge between where I am to where you are, and see what is it that I should do to reach where you are. And for that, what I tell myself is, yes, I also have a reward circuit. I also have goals, but then my problem, the reason why I cannot reach where he is today is because I want a million different things. Everything triggers my reward circuit. Today might be watching a game, and then tomorrow might be waking up late, and so many things. Whereas if I eliminate everything and then keep that one single goal, because physiologically we are all the same. So what has transformed the normal physiology that we all have into what we really call a hero here is this, I think, is the one big difference.
Right. And the research on happiness, the science of happiness, more than simply a positive mood, happiness is a state of well-being that encompasses living a good life. That is, with a sense of meaning and deep satisfaction. Growing body of research suggests that happiness can improve your physical health, and it goes on to say that. But it also goes on that for success, like happiness, cannot be pursued, it must come ensued. But what they're saying is that, just like you were saying, Dr. Venkat, that the more we try and do, the more we're going to fail at. But the happiness is actually defined by current research as knowing that our efforts created a change. Knowing that our effort, and I was looking for what is success theory, and it says that the more you focus on achieve success, the more chances to fail, which I believe, and that's true. So the more you risk, so the John Baines of the world, the more you risk, the bigger chance of falling flat on your face, right? But what they're finding is that success only comes when the unintended side effect of one's dedication cause effect more in other people than in the oneself. Yes, Dr. Joshi.
I appreciate, and I agree with all of that. Is this something?
Is it? Let's switch it.
I would just say that, and this is somewhat of an editorial comment, that when talk about happiness, resilience, faith, the medical establishment is not necessarily focusing on studying these things, right? A lot of it may be pill A versus pill B for your blood pressure. It may be, or for other medical conditions. What fills hospital beds is not happiness. And if you look at the hospital lobby, not a knock on hospitals, I'm just saying the reality of institutions, politics, funding of research. So you really have to work hard as the public. We have to work hard to find nuggets of truth about some of these things, right? So that's number one. So that's not meant to be a cop-out about what does the science show. The science is growing. I will point out that my eyes were opened when I attended the continuing medical education session of International Yoga Day 2 years ago, so 2017. And I'll point out that Maggie Gruskin is a leader and integrally involved in planning that event. But the session was 7 hours of content about the benefits of yoga, which is one form of thinking about the body and the mind and the spirit more holistically. And they showed a neat slide which said decade by decade how much funding and how much publications had come out. And it's really only picking up in the last 10 years, 20 years that there's more and more information in these areas. So just know that the medical establishment's not necessarily set up to be looking hard at these questions yet, okay? But it's coming, hopefully. And then just turning to this panelist, Mr. Baines, what I'll just tell you real quickly is that I really appreciate you and your persistence and your story. I don't have a lot of analysis other than two quick things, which is money is important. That comment was made, and it sounds like there's a lot of pain with some of the things that you went through. But for someone who is, I will say, liberated and evolved in his case, to recognize that if you focus on money as a priority over certain other critically important things like others and serving others, you get set up for pain. A former partner of mine had a great saying. He said, without a margin, there's no mission. So there is money needed in life to pay our mortgage or rent and fill the fridge and whatnot. But recognizing that there are other important things, more important things, was very, I appreciate that insight. And the other thing I'll say is, how old were you when you got that advice at the dinner table from your father to go after sources of funding other than what you were doing? 40. So I commend him for having the wisdom to listen to an aging parent, because I don't know where you all are in the process, but just watching my own parents age, sometimes it's hard to just remember that there's a lot of wisdom around us, including with our aging parents. So kudos to you for being able to listen and take that advice and succeed.
Excellent comments. Thank you very much. Yes.
I just have a couple comments. You know, your brain changes with your experience and your rewards. You know, when a woman has a child, she grows a completely different segment of brain tissue. And that brain tissue is all about the baby, so that you can hear the baby, you have that sixth sense about the baby, because the brain creates that just for that purpose. In your case, you are a person of action. You're not someone that tippy-toes. You don't get rewards from being tippy-toeing around the place. That's what I gather from this. So to me, when you decide to go out and get $5 commitments, that is tippy-toeing. So for me, there had to have been another reward that caused you to do that, because you're a gambler, you're aggressive, and every action that you do has to have a reward on the end of that action. And someone like that do not go out on a daily basis and get $5 money. So I'm trying to ask you, what do you think the other reward was? Where do you think the reward was actually that allowed you to tippy-toe for 3 years to make that money for that?
I really don't see including the man on the street as tippy-toeing. I see that as doing it the hard way, but probably the most meaningful way. But I think something that, well, actually, there were several things that drove me to do what I did, but I think one of the primary ones is the way I was brought up by my father was to never, ever run from a fight. No matter how great the challenge, no matter how big the opposition might be, never, ever run from a fight.
See, so that's the point.
You see, when I was denied by the banker.
See, that's the real reason why you did it. That fight was the reason. Those bankers are the ones, that's where the reward was. And you did whatever it took to make sure that they understood that you could do it. So that's where the reward was, not in actually doing the little things to get to that point.
But you know, it's really interesting that you bring that up, because, as I mentioned a little earlier, because of the way those people think, when I say those people, the business establishment, the country club crowd, because they all worship at the altar of the almighty dollar, and that's what's important to them.
Yes, and that's
I'm
exactly.
certainly not disagreeing with what you said, but money certainly is important. That's how we pay our bills.
You see, and that's the point. The point is that there's always got to be a reward for anything we do. And sometimes the thing that's on the front may not be the real reason why we do things. And so that's what I wanted to bring out, that the real reward was the people, how they treated you. And you could not live with that. And that's what a gambler would say. I cannot live with that. I don't care what it takes. I'm going to prove you wrong.
Well, I agree with that, but it wasn't just how they had treated me, it was how they were treating the veterans. And I saw that as a personal affront. And this may sound cavalier to you, but I was going to champion these people. And I'd be damned if I was going to let the country club crowd deny the veterans of being honored. And that's how I felt about it.
And if I can just,
And the way I looked at it was, yes, they stripped me of my wealth. They won that battle, but I won the war.
And you know what? Essentially, you weren't stripped from your wealth. I'm reminded of a quote by Mother Teresa that I live by. And it says, if we have no peace, it's because we've forgotten we belong to one another. And to add number 5 to the things that happened for you, you had to become sober. Because without your sobriety, and without you calling out a God whom you could not see, but you knew who had omniscient power over what was trying to stronghold you, you knew that I had to have help from a source, from the one who created the manual for human life. And when you did that, it opened up the door and it bound the hand of Satan to hold you back from your Jeremiah 23 and 11, where it says, I know the plans that I have for you, plans to prosper you and plans to give you a hope and a future. And I am grateful that you have no shame in your God game to talk about how he met you on the floor in your Fruit of the Looms and supernaturally and miraculously. We live in such a godless generation. People don't even believe in miracles of healing and deliverance, but your mind was transformed in that moment to know, if God, if you don't help me, I'll go to my grave in my Fruit of the Looms.
Yep, that's what was happening.
You know, and
John, yes.
and one other thing, you know, them stripping him of his financial abilities, that didn't matter to him, because in his mind, once you've done it once, you can do it twice,
That's right.
and you do it 3 times. So that was not a problem, and so he could move forward and do whatever it took to get to that point.
So, yeah, we want to wrap it up because we've got other experts. I want you to hear their stories. Any other? Maggie, do you need to?
Real quick, I think a segue here, when you experienced that moment, I believe it left an imprint, a soul imprint. And these can be just millisecond experience that can shift our trajectory in life. And I think what you connected with was the moving from 3rd chakra to 4th chakra consciousness, that you're no longer looking at the economy as what really rules the power system. He is now operating under what I call 4th chakra economy, which means that which connects us to our purpose. So I just wanted to share that.
Awesome. Look that one up. Okay. All right, John. Thank you so much, John.